And that jarring cacophony tells you that you're with the power of three as we continue our exciting adventures that are too broad and too deep. I'm Kenny Smith.
And I'm David Steele. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us on day 3 of our little trip through the alternate universe cycle, as it were, of the new adventures published by Virgin back in the 90s and all of that. And today's book is The Left-Handed Hummingbird. Now, this is an interesting episode, listeners. This is essentially a telesnap reconstruction or an animation of a missing episode, or someone running the tapes of Curse of Fenric back and taping over them and having to remount. Or this is the equivalent of Kenny and I setting up a marquee in the car park at Elstree Studios because we had a profound technical problem when we recorded this episode originally, about a month ago?
About 7 weeks, actually.
Yeah, longer than that. And it didn't record properly, so we're having to do it again, which is quite interesting because we're both trying very hard to remember what we said about it the first time.
But the good thing is, we can see the sound waves are here, so all is good. We are recording loud and clear. So
wonderful.
Yeah, let's just hope that something doesn't go wrong post-recording. Anyway, it won't. We'll keep a giant magnet away.
We'll have to make sure not like that episode of Sides of Doom that was misfiled in the BBC Film and Television Library prior to transmission, but thankfully being found. Stop it, right? You know what I'm saying. Anyway, so The Left-Handed Hummingbird. When was it published, Kenneth?
Well, this was the 21st novel in the Virgin New Adventures series. It was by Kate Orman and released on the 2nd of December 1993, right at the end of the 30th anniversary year. It featured the 7th Doctor Ace and Bernice and has a cover by Pete Wallbank.
My goodness, so the Zeitgeist listeners at this point in, everyone would be dealing with dimensions and time and such things. That's what everyone, and of course Take That would probably just released Babe as a single, which failed to make the Christmas number 1 because of the Mr. Blobby single. So that's what was going on in the world.
Were they number 2 and then Mr. Blobby went... they were number 1, then it dropped to number 2 and then they went back up.
Yeah, and and the single mix was quite good because that sort of like it was a remix from the album version that had a sort of nice sort of Christmassy sort of thing with some bells and stuff. And it's a terrible song. I actually loathe it. But there you go. I wouldn't say that to their face though. So the back cover then.
Oh, But Peter, tell us what's on the front cover today.
We could phone him and ask him. No. So we have the New Adventures Doctor Who box logo on the cover. In the background of the main image, I think the keywords here are blue and gold, and I don't mean Booster and Beetle. There's a large Aztec temple, columns of smoke rising from it, but in the foreground, looking as if he's kind of doing a breakdancing move, perhaps inspired by the video for Take That's Could It Be Magic. The Doctor, as played by TV's Sylvester McCoy, is doing what looks like a breakdance move. Perhaps he'd been watching the video for Could It Be Magic but Take That. Maybe he's as much a Take That fan as I am. He's crouching with his brolly in his left hand and he seems to be avoiding a very chiselled, dark-skinned figure wearing robes and a headdress with a face painted blue who seems to be doing a hand gesture or perhaps a karate chop in the Doctor's direction. There's also some carvings in the foreground. There is the distinctive signature of Pete Wallbank because it is his, and frankly it's a beauty. And then we have a large caption box at the bottom that reads The Left-Handed Hummingbird, Kate Orman.
It is indeed. So why don't you flip it over and tell us what's in the back, Dave?
I'd love to. He took up a firing stance, holding the 38 out in front of him. Mr. Lennon, he said. 1968, Christian Alvarez meets the Doctor in London. 1978, the Great Temple of the Aztecs is discovered in Mexico. 1980, John Lennon is murdered in New York. 1994, a gunman runs amok in Mexico City. Each time, Christian is there. Each time, he experiences the blue, a traumatic psychic shock. Only the Doctor can help him, but the Doctor has problems of his own. Following the events of Blood, Heat and the Dimension Riders, the Doctor knows that someone or something has been tinkering with time. Now he finds that events in his own past have been altered, and a lethal force from South America's prehistory has been released. The Doctor, Ace and Bernice travel to the Aztec Empire in 1487, to London in the swinging 60s, and to the sinking of the Titanic as they attempt to rectify the temporal faults, and survive the attacks of the living god. Oh, here we go. Huitzlin.
Yay!
Doctor Who 30th anniversary 1963 to 1993, that lovely little scroll logo, which hopefully Kenny will use at some point in the socials this week. Full-length original novels based on the long-running science fiction blah blah blah. Kate Orman lives in Australia. The Left-Handed Hummingbird is a triple first. Kate's first novel, the first new adventure written by a woman, and the first written by an Antipodean. Well done, Kate.
Yeah.
21 books to get a female author in. gosh.
Yeah. Talking of the 30th anniversary logo, I just remembered something. I was recently in your old stomping ground of HMV East Kilbride, and there was a gentleman behind the counter, and he had a replica of the 30th anniversary logo badge on. He's a couple of other Doctor badges. So I got chatting to him and talking about the Power of Three podcast. So if you're listening, and I've forgotten your name, sir, I will have to say hello next time I'm in, then thanks for listening. Because he did subscribe and follow us. So there we go.
I don't think I know anyone at East Kilbride anymore.
You know the manager guy? He's still there.
Yeah, I think Paul, last I heard, Paul was still looking after East Kilbride and Braehead, but I don't know if that's still the case. Fascinating.
So before we go on,
yes,
shall we hear from Pete Wallbank, the cover artist?
Oh, that'd be amazing.
Well, my name is Pete Wallbank, and I'm an illustrator by profession, commercial artist. I was connected to the worlds of Doctor Who, and I worked on a couple of titles for the New Adventures, namely the Left-Handed Hummingbird and No Future.
Indeed you were. Now, of course, when you were commissioned to do this, of course, your name was known in fan circles for your work, which appeared in magazines and the likes, and I think you got the VHS cover at this point as well.
I think I don't know. I think there seemed to be quite a few things that came along in the year of 1993. So maybe the VHS Arc of Infinity, if that's correct, came along in, I think it was around the November or December of 1993. So maybe the New Adventures came along within that year somewhere.
So I take it then that Doctor Who had been a passion, as we were talking about, but when did the love of art begin?
I suppose, like a lot of kids, you kind of were inspired by something, and then you were then inspired to want to create or draw. And I remember as a kid, I was into all sorts of fantastical stuff, and I was allowed, fortunately, I was the allowance of being able to watch all this stuff by my parents. And I remember seeing one of those old sort of Japanese Godzilla, King Kong films. Absolutely transfixed by it as a sort of 4-5-year-old. And I was an early starter at school. And I remember going back into school the following day, wanting to replicate a scene through drawing of what I'd seen in this film the night before and gift it to my mother. And I attempted to do some scene of King Kong looming above a boat, if I can remember correctly. But it was shambolic drawing. But the idea was there. And I think with most things, if it charges your interest, you're going to stick with it. And I think from that moment onwards, it charged my interest in wanting to draw. And from that point onwards, it became what they call a pursued interest, and something that you stuck at and something that you got better at. And that's where it stems from, I think, that kind of creativity. And of course, kind of being interested in all things fantastical, part of that sphere of all things fantastical was Doctor Who. Doctor Who was on TV at the time. I remember seeing the very tail end of John Pertwee and him turning into Tom Baker, and as a very young child, not really understanding what it was all about. How was it this man changed into another face? So I didn't initially get it all. But then as we got into the Tom Baker shows, and he proved to be so amazing in the part, then I totally understood it, of course. And then as I pursued as a person, I suppose, with the love of all things fantastic, and as I got into the merchandise side of the show, collecting things, etc., I became aware of the Target books. And of course, the Target books always, certainly in my childhood, had ferociously good covers on them, from people like Chris Achilles, Jeff Cummins, and Andrew Skilleter. And but it was Andrew's work, actually, that caught my eye massively. There's something about his work that I thought was quite magical, and it very much inspired me to want to draw Doctor Who and to kind of ape the techniques he was using at the time, because he was a fairly prolific airbrush user, and I kind of got into that via his work. So yeah, that's when it came about, really. But if you were kind of pushing me to who was the legend Doctor Who artist, I'd say it was Andrew. Purely because of what his work meant to me.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant, and just the fact that he's still publishing his work in collected compendiums now, so it shows there's still a big interest in him.
Yeah, very much so, and rightfully so, because I mean there are people of my generation, which are probably maybe the last generation of traditional organic illustrators, that were massively inspired by him, and by Chris, and by Jeff, and all of the other brilliant people that were involved with the series of books. So these people are kind of artistic gods in a way,
They definitely are. I think that legendary amongst Doctor Who fans, and indeed people with a wider love of fantasy and art and such like. So yeah, they're brilliant. So of course you were getting some bits published in DWM and DWB.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then of course you must have been delighted then with obviously having got that bit of profile there, that you get the call from Peter Darvill Evans to say, come and work on a New Adventures cover.
Yeah, well, I'd worked with him previously on another Doctor Who thing, and he kind of kept my name on file, as it were. And yeah, I think it may have been around the May time of 1993, where I think it was his publishing assistant. I can't remember her name, I'm sorry, but I got a call off her, and she said, would you like to do the Doctor Who New Adventures? And I said, yeah, I'd love to, because obviously the books had been out for a year or so, and they'd become established as the way that Doctor Who was moving forward. It was the way of keeping Doctor Who alive, I suppose, after the cancellation of the show in the late 80s, if I remember correctly. So I jumped at the chance. I knew obviously it was going to be Sylvester McCoy. No, I hadn't been that enamoured by him on TV, I have to say. But maybe that was because my interests were diversifying at that point as a person. Maybe I was kind of, leaving Doctor Who behind a bit. But then again, you'd never leave Doctor Who behind for some reason. So I waited I didn't get the complete novel to read, as I remember, but I got snatches of, and I think there was a very specific brief in mind to work to. There were set elements that they wanted on the cover, etc.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it just now, and there's the fact that you've got an Aztec setting, which obviously is a bit of a gift, because it straight away with you've got that Mexican background, so it helps give the location. And then we've got the Doctor in his new costume, and an Aztec god in Huitzilin, the titular left-handed hummingbird.
Yeah. Well, as I remember, I mean, what you see there is the second version of, because I produced an initial concept for it, and they said it was all a bit too intense, a little bit too grown up, and I was reminded that Doctor Who was essentially children's publishing. Now, obviously, by that point, I would have said that Doctor Who wasn't, in essence, children's publishing, because it had kind of transgressed that, I thought. That's why I thought I was able to perhaps get away with something a little bit more grown up. But they said, no, tone it down. We need to have it in such and such a way. So I had to do a redraft of it, and that's the version that they went with that you see.
I'd imagine then that would involve a wee bit of research. Then you're getting a look at, perhaps, remember those old days when you'd go to a library to do your research to get an idea as to what the temple would look like and how Aztecs of the period would have dressed?
That's exactly what it was, and it's hard to believe that we had those days of where we couldn't open up our iPad or our phone and search for images ad infinitum, and then we could download or save. There was nothing like that back in the day, and it literally was, going into a library, speaking to the assistant, saying and tell them what you're looking for. And they'd always be so brilliant in helping you to search for stuff. And, they'd kind of say, well, what do you want it for? And I'd say, well, I'm researching this Doctor Who book. And of course, then you get double the help, because Doctor Who is so fondly, loved in society. So there was always a connection there,
Yeah. Was it sort of difficult sort of capturing that likeness for Sylvester McCoy? Because I think he's very recognisable in sort of that sort of season 24. He's got that sort of quirkiness just in the way that you've captured him there.
As I remember, it was a bit of, as is typical with this sort of work, and it was a bit of a Frankenstein job where you're piecing together from other sort of source materials. So I think I'd probably used 3 or 4 different things to create that pose of Sylvester, including his likeness. As I remember, one of the things that they pulled me up on was that they found that the original version, that Sylvester's likeness was too intense. It was too much in pain, as they described it. So then it had to be re-rendered into something that was a little bit more familiar, shall we say.
How was it you were sort of getting that image of an Aztec? Because he's just looking at him, he's a very well-defined gentleman, but with very, very evil face.
Well, it's if I'm to be brutally honest, again, it's taking something that's established and then redressing it, which is often the art of the illustrator. They'll find something that's just right, and then you have to redress it and embellish it. And I think I'd come across a picture of Jackie Chan from a film called The Protector. And so I looked at the pose and looked how I could mess around with it. And Jackie Chan's face seemed right for it in a way, because although Jackie Chan is he's an Asian actor, he seemed to have that kind of Mexican look about him as well. And they wanted these kind of blue sort of piercing eyes, or just glowing eyes. And I remember a show from when I was a kid called Sky, which I believe is another big Finnish thing at the moment.
Absolutely.
This freaky character, which was he was an element of the earth, as I remember. He had these opaque blue eyes, and it was the most unsettling thing to see as a kid, actually. But so that came to mind when I was creating this Aztec god, as it were.
How did you find the formatting and the shape to work with? Because when we spoke with Jeff about Blood Heat, he loathed the fact that the obviously the New Adventures logo was at the top, and then you've got the book title at the bottom. Did you find that quite limiting, or was it something you just worked around?
I think because it's established, I worked around it. But as a person that wanted to create a fuller picture, yeah, I absolutely agree with Jeff on that one. It was limiting, really, because these were solid blocks. They were not transparent blocks. So effectively, you were trying to bunch everything together between these 2 solid blocks, because you knew that none of the image would be shown through those blocks. So it's not like the old days when they used to overlay the logo, and you would see your work flow through the logo, as it were. This was a different kettle of fish. This was very almost comic-like, I think, what they were trying to achieve. So yeah, a bit frustrating, but nevertheless, you work with what you're given, I suppose.
Yep. Do you still have the original?
No, I couldn't tell you where it is. It's like one of those things that, when you get involved with something like Doctor Who, and there are other things as well, but mainly Doctor Who, I think, if you, were connected to the artwork in any way, people love to collect the originals, and hang them. And I can't remember who I sold that to, but I know it's changed hands a couple of times, so I wouldn't know where it is today.
How do you look back on this one?
How do I look back on it? I think it was. I'm fond of it. I think I'm fond of the sky more than I am of anything else. I remember putting a lot into that sky. If I remember correctly, it was done one Sunday afternoon. And I'm fond of the fact that it was the first one I had a chance to work on. So yeah, fondly, very much. Yeah.
Fantastic. That's great, Pete. Thank you so much.
It's okay. Thank you.
Gosh, Kenny's Infinite Address Book listeners. Pete Wallbank. I remember Pete did loads of covers for the Frame at one point. It was great. Big fan.
Yeah, I actually managed to get hold of him through his son Rafe, who does covers for Big Finish. He's brilliant.
Awesome.
Young Rafe, so...
Awesome.
Yeah.
We should get Rafe on at some point as well then, if we haven't done so already.
We haven't done so yet, so...
It's going to happen. It's going to happen.
It's great. He's a talented young fella, so yes, it will happen. Before we go on, why don't we hear the DWM prelude from this story, and it's read for us, as always, by Stevie Day.
It was very dark down this end of the house. Jackie moved slowly, one hand pushed against the wall, the other protectively covering her swollen belly. She'd had to take off her shoes to try and move more quietly, but all she managed to do was make her feet cold. There was a collective shout of laughter from somewhere upstairs. The soldiers were enjoying their Christmas Eve party. Jackie had gone to a lot of trouble to make sure they had a good time, smuggling bottles of booze into the house in paper bags, holding them so tight they wouldn't clink. The lieutenant hadn't suspected a thing. The last time she'd been down the pub, she made a break for it, slipping away from the soldiers and into the women's loo, some crazy plan of climbing out the window. There wasn't a window. Anyway, as it turned out, she and Baby probably couldn't have fitted through together. In the end, the uniforms came in and got her, looking faintly embarrassed as they stomped into the ladies in their big tough boots. There were still guards on all the doors and the gate, but the inside of the house was dead quiet. Only the party sounds and snores for some of the rooms punctuated the winter silence. Jackie's fingers slid over the handle of the door. She reached into the pocket of her overalls and took out a single key, deftly removed from the lieutenant's master set this afternoon, just after lunch. When she said she wanted to help with the cleaning, they thought she was just bored, waiting around for her turn for the tests. But she knew from being in prison that cleaners can get in anywhere they like. She pushed open the door and said, "I heard you screaming." Until now, she'd only glimpsed the inside of the room. She knew there was a bed and some things that went beep. And then she saw the low electronic sound came from an EEG machine trailing long wires like tentacles of an octopus reaching out to the dark figure in the bed. The man turned to look at her, and she could see the curve of his face reflected in the green light of the EEG screen. His eyes, startlingly clear in the darkness. Jackie felt the heat start up on her face. "Well," she said, "I didn't hear you." She put both of her hands on her belly. He didn't say anything, just looked at her. How come he was so quiet? How long had he been there? A week? 2 weeks? Jackie edged into the room. It was even colder inside. "When I first came here," she went on, the words spilling out of her in a stage whisper, "they thought I was a psychic. But it's not me. It's the kid." She grinned suddenly. "I picked his daddy specifically. He was working at a petrol station. He had the most beautiful skin, deep, deep brown and smooth as an apple. I chose him because I wanted my baby to have that skin. But the kid got something more. A little extra, you know?" The grin slid off her face, under his cloudy stare. "Can you understand me?" No answer. Perhaps they'd put drugs in his food. She'd seen the metal trays they carried to him, making sure they closed the door before anyone could get a look inside. "You can trust me. They won't let me go either." She hesitated, squatted with difficulty beside his bed. "So, Junior, he heard you screaming. He woke me up the first time. I could hear him having nightmares down there, you know?" No answer. "It's just all those soldiers who brought you here, and the locked room, and all the guards. The lieutenant won't let anyone near you. You must be something pretty special, right? A space alien." And her voice dropped into a conspiratorial whisper. "That's what the soldiers say. A real, live space alien." Why wouldn't he answer? She patted her stomach for the comforting feel of the firm curve of flesh wanting to explain. I dream what the baby dreams. He sends me messages. Usually it's just darkness and warmth. Lovely, but this time it was pyramids and flowers and blazing blue sky and someone with a smile like a stab of light and hair whiter than sand. Impossible things he's never seen. Is that where you come from? Or is it somewhere you visited? She realised her voice had fallen into a sing-song, the lilting aimlessness of voices around a campfire while guitars and joints were passed from hand to hand, pungent smoke drifting up to the stairs. Maybe he didn't have friends either. No one would come looking for him, to take him away. How long would it be before Jackie was back outside underneath the stars? Maybe they'd never let her go. Maybe they'd keep her baby. And what would they do with the space alien? What would they do with him? She tried to imagine the place he'd come from, the places he might have been, rocking through the sky in his UFO like a magic carpet ride. "Get out," said the man. She was so startled by his voice, it was a moment before she noticed the EEG machine was moving, making horrible scratching noises, and its needles trailed across the paper. A moment later, Junior kicked, a sharp movement deep inside her. "Please," he said, and his hands had pulled free of the covers of the bed and she saw light glinting on the handcuffs tangled between his wrists. "Go now!" It hadn't occurred to her the reason he was locked away might be that he was dangerous. Jackie felt Junior kicking and kicking at her womb, and she climbed unsteadily to her feet and stumbled across the cold floor, pushed back by the panic in his voice as he screamed at her desperately. "Get out! Get out! Get out!" Oh God, Junior was screaming. The lights came slamming on around her, and there were soldiers and men and women in white coats running in, but Jackie didn't hear it, Jackie didn't see it. She heard and saw what Junior was hearing and searing, a great wind exploding out of nothing, a great gush of blue flame exploding, flooding into the baby, too much for it to hold, too much, stop, it's too much, oh God, stop! An alien screaming because he was being used, because he couldn't stop it. Stop the flood that was pouring through him into the child. A terrible face, painted blue and black, laughing and laughing, white hair floating round the warrior's head as he let loose his battle cry. They stepped over Jackie, stepped around the hippie curled up on the floor in the hallway, taking no notice of her.
Thanks, Stevie. Some man giving me a rest actually from doing all these.
So Dave, Left-Handed Hummingbird, let's just say it was controversial at the time due to the fact that the Doctor takes drugs.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, this. I remember nipping round to buy it in Dillon's, as was on Argyle Street in Glasgow, because my friend Richard, who was a colleague of mine, because at this time, the point this book came out, I had not long started working in Stateside Comics in the basement of Virgin in Union Street. Only been there about a month or so, and now that I think back on it, I think it was Richard's enthusiasm for this that kind of got me back in, because I remember at the start of 1994 reading a few of the New Adventures, because I'd kind of stalled after the first couple, and Richard had enthused about it because he had been corresponding with Kate Orman. This would be early days of the internet and all that sort of stuff, and Richard was at uni at Glasgow Uni, and he was involved in his sort of university newspaper, so I got a feeling that might have been part of it. He was maybe corresponding to get some kind of article together, but I do remember reading it and asking him to ask Kate about all the song lyric quoting, because there's a point when someone says, "Have you had that spirit here since 1969?" which is obviously from Hotel California by the Eagles, and there's a few other sort of similar things throughout, if memory serves. The Doctor taking drugs and all that, it's kind of it was kind of relevant to the plot, wasn't it?
It was indeed,
yeah,
because he needed to boost his telepathic abilities.
Yeah, and to be honest, it's the sort of thing that, if memory serves, the New Adventures used to do stuff like that all the time.
Yep.
Really, they all went through a bit of a phase of being obsessed with cyberspace at points, and it was pushing the envelope, which
it was.
The books were very good at.
Yep, and the Doctor also has 3 lumps of LSD spiked sugar at one point in the book as well when he's in the 60s. Of course it was the 60s.
Of course he does.
Yeah, but of course I think the big thing is the other thing that I remember apart from Doc taking drugs is the real life tie-in with the assassination of John Lennon.
Yeah, and also we'll come back to that one actually, because I've got a fair bit to say on that. there's also the Titanic.
Yes, of course.
Which obviously historically happened before the death of John Lennon, so that's why we'll talk about it. And this was a couple of years obviously before the big movie. The thing that stuck in my head, I think it stuck in everyone's head, was the doctor sort of landing the ship on the deck of the Titanic, and he had a list of the survivors in his pocket. And I remember at the time being really, really struck by that, because it seemed a very Seventh Doctor sort of thing to do. You can imagine maybe some of the other guys trying to help as many people as possible, but the Doctor at this point was so laser focused and so on mission, and I remember that just sort of being like, oh. But the John Lennon thing's interesting. We did talk about this in our first attempt to record this episode, which obviously was lost. Maybe they'll find it in a porta cabin in Africa in 30 years' time.
I once interviewed the daughter of a Titanic survivor.
Wow.
Her name's Mary, and she lives in Cambuslang. Well, I used to hope she still does. She was a lovely lady who I got to know through the community council in Cambuslang when I was working in the local paper, and it came up to the 100th anniversary of the disaster.
Sure.
And she mentioned to me to say that, would you maybe be interested in a wee story that Mary Girling, that was her name, that her mum had been a baby on the Titanic and had survived it. And so she had various cuttings and things and photos of her mum over the years, a picture of her mum and the family as a wee baby on the Titanic before it sailed, and these things survived, but she said that her mum would never talk about it. She was not interested in a night to remember or anything like that, because it was just, even though she was a baby and wouldn't remember it, there was still something she just wouldn't go near.
God, that's terrifying. Wow. It's a weird thing, the Titanic, because it's I remember when the film came out, and I remember reading that some church in America, New York I think it was, had a sort of service for people who wanted to grieve for the people who died. And it's such a weird sort of thing that it has such a weird sort of hold on popular culture and culture. It's such a strange thing. Similarly, the death of John Lennon being used. Now this is only, when you say the book was published at the start of December 93, that's more or less exactly 13 years after it happened, which 13 years now, 13 years then probably felt like a lifetime for those of us who were quite young. I'm a massive Beatles fan, like huge Beatles fan. I'm very excited at the recent announcements about the expanded anthology stuff that's going to be available soon. And I was a massive Beatles fan by the time the book came out. I wasn't a massive Beatles fan when John Lennon died. I remember not really knowing who he was. It was ages before it dawned on me that he was one of the Beatles, and the guy from Wings and the voice of Thomas the Tank Engine and the guy that did Got My Mind Set on You, they were all in the Beatles. It took me a long time to join the dots. And it's interesting because it was a real sort of fashion in the 80s and well into the 90s, which I think only really the anthology sort of redressed slightly. It's changed a lot now because so much time has passed, but there was McCartney's talked about it himself. It was sort of St. John, because he died so young and because of the horrible way that he died. He was sort of revered in a way that the other Beatles weren't, and a lot of really nasty stuff was said about Paul McCartney around this time in the early 90s. And it was interesting thinking back on the book and thinking back on that period as a Beatles fan. It's quite interesting, and I'm sort of stunned at the fact it was only 13 years later. And I think thinking back on it now, I feel a little bit. Gives me a bit of a bad taste in the mouth.
Yeah, I suppose I'm just having a quick Google just now while you're talking to see who died that year, so we can do comparative comparisons. It's
the sort of thing that Big Finish did a really good story about, that referenced the Beatles for the 50th anniversary called was it Fanfare for the Common Men?
Yeah,
you should check that out, listeners, if you haven't. It's a weird one. As a massive Beatles fan, and I'll be honest, John Lennon's not my favourite Beatle, but it's a weird thing thinking about the proximity to his death that they used it. And to me, looking back on it, that feels really, really soon. That feels like too soon in a way, because as an adult now, I'm 52 now, 13 years is nothing. I remember 2012 really, really clearly, and it feels like no time at all. So it's weird looking at it from that perspective. And also, we had an episode of the Beatles on TV last year, which kind of did riffed on slightly similar sort of things. It was that terrible movie a few years ago, Yesterday, that Richard Curtis was involved in, which was shocking and just made me angry. But it's a weird one. Like, I think a more twitchy or sensitive to John's death being used in a Doctor Who story than I maybe would have been at the time. You're not. I mean, I know you're not especially fussed about the Beatles or anything.
I have an interest from a popular culture point of view, and I'm particularly interested in this new 4th volume of the anthology that's going to be included. But I've just had a quick check there online. Right. That'd be the equivalent of doing a story about Whitney Houston today.
Interesting.
Because she died in 2012.
Right. Yeah. One thing I remember that was how quickly the HMV headerboard graphics were sent through. It was within a week we had them in store. It was to use them, if we were putting a memorial section in, and we were just sort of like, oh my goodness. Yeah, it's no time at all. It'll be interesting to hear what Kate says about such things. It's an obvious thing in a way to use in a Doctor Who story and especially in a spin-off media sort of thing, because it's a cultural touchstone. I mean, I have much more of a sensitivity to John Lennon's death now than I did when I was 7 years old and it happened. And I think that's probably the same for a lot of people. But for folk that grew up knowing the Beatles and stuff, I imagine it probably was a lot more devastating than it was to me at the time. But anyway, this has been my Beatles monologue.
Interesting. Well, Kate Orman, of course, came to visit Scotland in the summer of 1993.
Right.
Before the book came out. She was in a UK visit, and I think she recorded the previously unreleased real-time pictures Mythmakers release.
Oh yeah, of course, which we've seen now, which is glorious.
Indeed.
A beautiful, amazing little time capsule.
Yep.
With quite a few people who've been on the show.
Indeed,
and quite a few people who were still trying to hope to arrange to get on the show.
Indeed. So there's plenty of nostalgia from that point of view. But Kate she came along to the Edinburgh Doctor Who group.
Oh, really?
And sadly, I wasn't there because I used to go every Monday. But because it was the summer, I was back in Glasgow and wasn't travelling through every Monday to the group, because that would have cost me a fortune.
Of course.
And I didn't have a particularly well-paid student job. But Kate came through and was discussing the name of her book, which had been announced by that point. And one of the people who was there was Brian Ferguson, who is now the arts correspondent for the Herald newspaper in Glasgow.
Okay, cool.
And Brian heard the title of this book. Brian's a bit of a traditionalist when it comes to Doctor Who story titles. Right. And his reaction was, "Oh, no, please, you can't call it that. Oh, no. He was outraged, so... Oh, dear.
It's a very New Adventures title, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is where they're starting to push things, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, they've been going for a couple of years at this point. They've really got a real sense of their own identity. The Doctor, Ace and Bernice had been the current team for a while, and I was one of those, by the time I read this, I'd been away, but this was one of the ones. It was this one in Blood Heat. I probably said this already, but this one in Blood Heat, because I can't remember what we said when we recorded the Blood Heat episode, because it was 2 days ago, listeners, as far as we're listening, but it was weeks ago now that Kenny and I did it. It was the appeal of Blood Heat and that alternate version of the Silurians that kind of got me back in, and and my friend Richard's enthusiasm for this one was a factor in that as well.
Well, talking of enthusiasm, Kate Orman was delighted to chat with us earlier this year.
Awesome, let's go.
My name's Kate Orman and I wrote The Left-Handed Hummingbird.
Fantastic, Kate. It's a joy to see you here on the Pyrography, or hear you, because it's an audio only, of course. So, when did your love of Doctor Who begin? Because, of course, there was a bit of the Scottish word would be a sort of a stooshy, a surprise, a delight that somebody on the other side of the world was writing a Doctor Who novel. How could this happen? In a good way. People were genuinely surprised. So when did your love of the show begin? I assume it was watching on the ABC.
That's right. I actually don't know what the first Doctor Who story I ever saw was, because I would have been watching it probably cradled in my mother's arms. It was huge down here when I was a kid. Everybody watched it. The teachers at school watched it. Everybody, all the kids that I knew watched it and could discuss last night's episode with you. And so it's just always been there as part of the fabric of my life. And because it was shown almost every night of the week, I think it was Monday to Thursday, it really was, ubiquitous isn't the right word, but it was omnipresent. It was always there, always part of your experience of the day. And so to write for Doctor Who seemed very natural. I'd joined fandom by that point, and so I was writing for fanzines and talking to other fans, and having the advantage of not just everybody around me, just, it's just another television show that everybody watches, so it's just a popular television show. but it's also you've got that intensity that's led to it by fandom and a kind of a slightly deeper understanding of how it's being made and what's happening. And so that's very exciting. But I think it was the fanzines where I was writing a lot of fan fiction, and I discovered that I really, really enjoyed writing fiction. And here I had this outlet where people would actually, at least a few people would actually read it. And so that's where I got my start, was in these Australian fanzines. And then it was a very natural step to submitting Doctor Who proposals to Virgin Books when they opened their gates and said, the fools, and said, anyone can send us their Doctor Who proposal. And of course, everyone did. And I was one of the lucky ones.
I was one of the unlucky ones, but there we go. But yeah, I think it's fantastic. That's the thing that fanzines gave so many people like yourself and Paul Cornell and so many people a chance to do their, almost like their training ground, sort of like to find out what works and develop themselves and their style and how to tell a story.
Yeah, I mean, it was incredible luck to have that opportunity. It took me 3 tries to get published. I had 2 other proposals before that, and then the Left-Handed Hummingbird was the 3rd one. And I was determined that I was just going to keep sending them proposals until something got accepted. But I still managed to do it quite quickly, which I was extremely happy about. So many people got their start, not just in Doctor Who publishing, but as in publishing at all, like me, by doing a Doctor Who novel. And, it was like training on the job, if you like. I learned an awful lot by writing that first novel, and then you learn more on the second novel, and each one that you write, you learn mostly what not to do is what you learn. And you think, I've made this mistake this time, and I'm not going to do it again. I think I'm still making mistakes 30 years later, but you just keep learning the whole time. But yeah, from there on, it was just a matter of coming up with a proposal that Virgin could use. It was sometimes a question of coming up with a few different proposals, and they might say, oh, well, look, we've already got a book that's a bit like this one, or that one really doesn't work, but this one's good, so why don't we try to develop that? There was one time when I proposed something to do with intelligent snow, and I'd worked this whole thing out, and then they had to say, well, look, we're terribly sorry, but we actually have 3 proposals about intelligent snow at the moment. And I'm thinking, what are the chances that 3 other people have come up with that idea? But they had, and one of them went into print eventually. I forgot which book it is. Gosh, it's a while ago.
That's incredible. It just sod's law. But of course, I suppose the thing that so many people now won't appreciate is the fact that being on the other side of the world, this was pre-email days and things like that, and it was physically print it out, take it to the post office and send it over.
Well, that's a really good point. If I wanted to communicate with Virgin, I had to wait up really late at night and phone them. And a few people had email, but mostly it was letters. So if the authors wanted to communicate with each other, we would be sending each other letters. And the Left-Handed Hummingbird was this huge package that I had to take to the post office, which cost a fortune probably in postage to send off. So eventually, much later on in the novels, we were just emailing in the manuscripts, and it must have been a great relief for the publishers.
And for your bank balance as well.
Yeah, no joke.
Yeah. So do you remember what was in your initial pitch? Because I'd imagine that it would be, from having spoken to other authors, it tends to be fairly similar to what ultimately gets commissioned.
I don't think any major changes were made to that book. So I think that you're right, that the initial pitch was probably pretty close to the final version of the story, which means they must have had a pretty strange looking pitch sitting on their desk, to be honest. They're saying, well, it's got the Aztecs and the Titanic and this trip to some hippies and all these other things going on at once. So I'm kind of glad they had faith in that.
Yeah, it's such a proper time traveling. When I say like Silver Nemesis, in the terms of it never stays still, it's very kinetic. We've got Switzerland, Mexico City, London, New York City, the Titanic, and it's very just always on the move. And I think that's the thing that gives it that energy to keep the story progressing and developing.
Kinetic is a great word. I can't sit still. I think I'm doing that thing where you've got all these ideas and you throw them all into your first novel. And then when you come to your second novel, you've sort of emptied the cupboard a little bit. And so you have to have a bit of a think. But yeah, it's like I had to cram every idea that I had into the one novel. And time travel makes it possible because I can jump from place to place. I can jump from time to time. And just put in every idea that I've got.
I imagine that you'd have to do a fair bit of research to do the Aztec content for this. And of course, pre-internet days, off to the library.
Well, I was working in a library. In fact, I was working at a university library. So I was in an extremely fortunate position. They actually had quite a good selection of books on the Aztecs, for a start, as well as a lot of the other subjects that I had to research. Maybe not the Titanic so much. I think that might be more slightly the realm of the general public library, though there was a lot of reading about the Titanic that went on. But the Aztec stuff, they even had the Florentine Codex, which is an actual ancient Aztec book, or a reproduction of it. They didn't have the actual book. And so I was able to go into that and borrow bits of Aztec dialogue from it. And hopefully that's given a flavour of authenticity to it. I mean, I was a bit of a research junkie, to be honest with you. It's terrible, actually. Writers can convince themselves that they're working by doing research, which is not really working. You've got to sit at the keyboard and type away to be working. But boy, I had a good time looking at all of those books. And I used to have a huge tub full of the notes that I'd taken, which I think is gone now. But there was an awful lot of note-taking that went on, that's for sure.
That's fantastic. I love that sort of thing. So how did you find writing for the Dr. Ace and indeed Benny, who was still a bit of a newcomer at this point?
Yeah, Paul Benny's a little bit of the odd man out in that book because she is quite new. I don't think Benny was in the original pitch. I think that's the thing that changed, was that I needed to add her. And I'm not sure if I did her justice. I worry a little bit that she didn't have as much to do as the other characters. But one thing that she did have to do is that she was able to remain relatively sane and humane, while the Doctor got more and more alien because of what's happening to him in the book. And Ace had become very withdrawn and kind of almost stiff almost. And the relationship between them was very strained. And so you've got Benny in the middle of that, being the one that you can perhaps empathise with a little bit more. So maybe her role in the book is actually quite good. I'm terrified of rereading that book. I have actually not read that book for decades. And I think I keep starting to reread it and then stopping myself. And I think what I'm worried about is that I'm going to start reading it and go, well, that should be changed, or that's not good, or that should be different. And I'm going to try and rewrite my 30-year-old novel, which I think would be terrible. So I really must sit down and have a reread of it, because people often ask about it or make comments on it, and I think, man, have I become unfamiliar with my own work? I don't know. I spent 9 months writing that book. I think it's probably kind of branded into my brain.
Oh, I think you might be pleasantly surprised, Kate. I really enjoyed going back to it.
Of course, part of this book deals with the murder of John Lennon, and that was just 13 years after he died. So how did that bit come about?
One of the earliest ideas that contributed to Left-Handed Hummingbird was this conception that I got that maybe if people entered an alternative state of consciousness, for example, by taking psychedelic drugs, that the experiences of all people who did that could somehow be connected through time and space, that could influence each other. And I had this chart showing the things, various events influencing each other in that way. I remember that Coleridge was on it, taking opium to write Kubla Khan, and the Beatles in their use of LSD. When I was a kid, reading about the Beatles using drugs was my introduction to the concept of drugs and how it might affect the mind. So I had that idea. You can see how it plays out in the novel with Zealand, with the blue connecting all these different times and places and completely different people. So there was that. And then the other thing was a terrible thing that happened in Sydney in 1991, which was a mass shooting. And in those days, they weren't something you took for granted. It was very unusual, and especially for Australia, that it was extraordinary. And I remember I kept clippings of it. I just sort of I was so appalled by it, and I thought, I've got to do something with this pointless violence that I don't understand. And you can sort of see how these two things, the idea of the Beatles and the LSD and the connection with everything, intersect the pointless violence, and John Lennon's murder is that point where the two of them intersect.
The thing that I really enjoyed at the time was the fact that you pulled in Unit, because again, that was something that would pop up intermittently on TV, and here we have them in. I think this is the first proper appearance since Battlefield, so it was nice to have that. And again, being international with Christian Alvarez.
Yeah. Unit are terrific for a number of reasons. One is, hooray, it's Unit. You know, it's always lovely to see them. Another reason is that they make things happen. You know, they're an organisation, so they organise things. And so if you need something to happen in your story, you can get Unit to go and cause that thing to happen. They've got people, they've got resources, and so they're very good for sort of organising the action. If you just had the characters by themselves, you might have to come up with some long, complicated and boring way that they get something to happen. But no, you've got Unit, hurrah! But yes, my knowledge of Mexico and Mexicans mostly came from reading old National Geographics. And again, I just worry a little bit that I might have gone off beam. But if I did, nobody's ever told me. So maybe they were being polite, but I think I must have vaguely got it accurate. So that's good. But I based poor old Christian was having the panic attacks, of course. And I based that on me because I was having panic attacks at the time, which have now thankfully been treated. But I wanted some poor character in there that represented, you know, how I might react to all of these drastic cosmic events, and that would be by completely freaking out, I would imagine. So yes, I liked him very much. You know, I should bring him back and do something with him.
The thing that, of course, that's the baddie of this one is the Blue, which of course then takes corporeal form with. Now, am I going to get the pronunciation correct? Huitzilin.
I think it's Huitzilin, but please don't quote me because I know for a fact that I have not been pronouncing those names exactly right. I was just looking at somebody's pronunciation guide for Nahuatl online. See, I'll just say Nahuatl, and that's classically the way that somebody who pronounces it with an English accent or speaking English would say Nahuatl. Oh no! See, I'll give up trying. I haven't learned to do it yet, and it's been a long time, so maybe I should learn now. Anyway, let's call him Huitzilin for argument's sake. Gee, I had fun with him. He's awful. He's dreadful. And the idea of a villain that doesn't necessarily do the bad things or cause the bad things, but simply takes advantage of all the bad things and there's so many bad things. So many terrible things that human beings do that he just has to sit back and soak it up and enjoy himself. You know, what a smug villain. What a nasty idea. So I had fun with him. And also kind of making him the opposite of the Doctor. I have that thing that gets mentioned a few times in the book about the Doctor and the warrior. And so you have Huitzilin as literally a warrior and as this kind of warrior figure and connected to this warrior god. And then the Doctor who's not a warrior at all and is trying to stop Ace from becoming this hardened warrior and is trying to put things back together rather than break them down. And so they make a kind of a natural pairing as goodie and baddie, I think.
And of course, even drug the Doctor and Ace, which of course is the thing that I think was a bit shocking at the time because you realise this is no longer a TV series. This, you know, obviously with what Paul Cornell had been doing, pushing it, and here we go. It's really into this is a proper adult science fiction series now. Yeah,
it's Time When Revelation was quite a shock of the wonderful you can do that, we can do that kind of sense. And so by the time you get to me, quite a few things, experimental things have been tried. And we know what we're allowed to do. We know kind of roughly what we can get away with. And we understand our audience. Our audience is not little kids. And so I was able to put in, as appropriate, a fair bit of violence. There is a bit of drug taking, which I am proud to say would pass the comics code authorities, or it would get the Comics Code authorities' approval because it doesn't lead to anything good, as you might imagine in a book that's this grim. But it's, these are subjects that I knew the reader's going to be able to cope with this. I'm not going to be horrifying some small child with it. Although, gosh, I remember there was one local library here that did actually put all of the Doctor Who books into the children's section, and we had to hurriedly tell them that was a terrible idea, and they had sorely misjudged where the New Adventures should be shelved. But yes, it was very freeing. It meant that you weren't watching yourself the whole time. You were seeing, what can I do? How can I make this intense for the reader? Because you don't want to be shoving in stuff that's just there to be gross or freak people out or stuff like that. Intensity was what I was going through all through that book, and there's some pretty intense stuff in there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, even now, it's you just think, wow, there's tension. It's tense throughout, because you do think, how are they going to get out of this one? And that's always the best way for me that Doctor Who should be. So how did you find being part of the alternate universe saga? Because at this point, of course, there's little things going on. And I think, if I remember correctly, in the writer's guidelines, it told us who was responsible. So did you enjoy that sort of playing around with established history a little bit?
I cheated a little bit, because the villain of the alternative universe cycle only appears very briefly in my book. And in fact, there is so much time travel and time-changing shenanigans that goes on in the book that it was only necessary to add that one little bit to say, and it was this guy all along. So, I got away with that one. I didn't have to integrate that particularly. So I was lucky. I mean, it was that thing of the right pitch at the right time. I was lucky. They were looking for books about time travel changing history, because they were putting together the cycle, the alternative history cycle. And so I fitted right in. So that was lucky.
Fantastic. So, of course, you send it over, the book's accepted, it's published, and it gets such great acclaim. And that must have been so gratifying for you to know that, as you say, that 9 months of blood, sweat, tears, and it's being appreciated for what it is, and people get it.
It was one of those milestones in your life where you think, I've done it. I've really accomplished something here. And the fact that it had this very positive response, it wasn't a universally positive response, which is fine, but it did very well. And I thought, I've done it. I've cracked it. I've actually managed to write a book, and it works. I can actually do this thing. One of the great things about the New Adventures was they were very various. So if you didn't like Plumber, then you might like the next book, or you might like the book after that. So as long as you didn't expect that you were going to like every single book, you were in a great position. You were guaranteed to have something that you were going to like, I think. It would roll around. And so I think that was one of the great strengths of the line. If they were all the Left-Handed Hummingbird, then that would be very, very boring.
Of course, you came over to the UK in the summer of 1993 before the book came out. And I missed you when you came to Edinburgh, because I was in the Edinburgh group and I was back in Glasgow that summer. And of course, the thing that I remember being told about your visit, somebody phoned me to tell me afterwards that you met my friend Brian. Brian's very much a traditional Doctor Who fan. And when he heard the title of the book, he was just, oh, no, please, you can't call it that. Oh, no, jokingly, of course. But it's amazing, because that was the thing where Doctor Who groups were effectively becoming book clubs for so many of us, because we would be discussing at length the latest novel and dissecting them and taking them apart, putting them back together, what we liked, what we weren't so sure of, and ongoing plot arcs. And it was an incredible time, really, to be a fan. No show on TV, but my God, we made the most of it.
Oh, yeah, gosh, I was on... I think that my primary means of contacting other fans was the internet by that point. So I was on rec.arts.doctorwho on Usenet, and spent a lot of time discussing the books there. Although, I mean, also in fan club meetings in Sydney and Newcastle here. So it was great. A lot of fans took to the books really, really well. So we must have been doing something right. I mean, maybe it's a little bit like when ITV wasn't on the air, and so Doctor Who's ratings went through the roof. We didn't have any competition from the television show. That might have been an incredibly difficult or different rather situation. But no, it was great. There was a real feeling of being part of something that was a part of fandom, a part of. I felt wonderful to be a part of this group of authors that were working together and trading notes. Yeah, it was a very exciting time. It was a terrifically exciting time. Yeah, that is the end of my answer.
And of course, that summer, you got the chance to meet fellow fans and fellow New Adventures writers, which was documented, as we were talking about before we started, in the Virgin Books DVD from Real Time, which is a fantastic little look back in the past. So that must have been really good for you to getting to meet the other authors and be able to actually exchange ideas and discuss things in person.
There was a party or an evening where the authors all got together, and I pitched? Did I pitch set piece? I must have pitched set piece at that party. So we were doing a lot of business. There was discussions about. I remember there were discussions about how to bring the master back, and I remember that David McEntee had quite a lot of ideas actually about that, because I can remember saying to him the master should be female, and he wasn't too keen on that particular idea. But you could tell that he was very keen on the character and very keen to find a way to introduce him to the New Adventures, which was cool. It worked, and yeah, I mean, again, there was that feeling of being part of that group and trading our ideas, and also all being fans together, which is always great. You've always got all of the in-jokes and the references that you all understand. So that was an absolutely amazing trip, the trip in '93. Yeah, I met so many of the authors, met Paul Cornell and met Nigel Robinson. Who else was at that party? Everybody was at that party.
Yeah, Justin Richards.
Oh, I wish I could give you a bit of a roll call, but...
Jim Morton, Andy Lane.
Of course. I mean, they're all in the video, so you can figure it out.
Yeah, and you can recognise them in the background, so yeah. Of course, I suppose the thing that I haven't mentioned is that the Left-Handed Hummingbird is hugely important in another way, because you were the first female author of an original Doctor Who novel. And I think it probably opened a few eyes for perhaps a few other people to try. Maybe they didn't always succeed, but people like Jacqueline Rayner and others would thankfully follow in your steps in years to come.
Yeah, I would love to think that there were women who wanted to have a crack at it, who thought, all right, they've published one woman, they might publish another one. So, but I was always, when I would go to fan meetings here in Sydney, it was not at all unusual for me to be the only woman, or maybe one of 2 or 3 women. And everybody, the rest of it was guys. So I suppose the proportions are about right. You wouldn't expect, if the same sort of demographic of people was submitting New Adventures proposals, then you wouldn't expect a lot of women to be published in the line. But though I don't know what the demographic was, but yeah, it would be wonderful if that was sort of inspiring in some way, rather than me just being an outlier. Similarly for international writers, because I suppose it could be easy for people to get the wrong impression and go and look at who's getting published and think, oh, well, they'll never take me because you have to be X, Y, or Z. So yeah, that'd be good. I'd like to think that.
Fantastic. Kate, thank you so much for your time and talking about the Left-Handed Hummingbird, and hopefully maybe get a chat at some point in the future about Set Piece and a few of the others.
That'd be wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Before we get to the contemporary review, let's have a second reading from the book, again courtesy of Stevie, as the Doctor encounters Switzerland.
Stevie, Day of Darkness.
That's a good Aztecs reference, Dave.
Yes, I know. Don't spell it out.
The Doctor stood ramrod straight, Whitsealand's pale light reflecting off his white jacket and throwing strange shadows across his face. He reached up and tore a handful of feathers out of his hair, the quills trailing blood. What was left of Anna lay on the carpet between them, already fading into oblivion. Christian took a step towards her, his shoe bumping into something on the floor, but the doctor restrained him with a gentle hand. "Give me the book, Christian," said the doctor quietly. Christian opened his mouth to say something, but Whitseelan turned his gaze on his descendant. "Shut up, little flower," he said. Chris's arms went slack, and he dropped the Codex Atlaca onto the floor. "His part is finished," said Whitseelan. The doctor carefully knelt, still keeping his eyes on the Aztec, and picked up the book. A flock of blue sparks exploded from inside the towels, wreathing his arms. He did not flinch. "The priestess who tried to use that spell against me was vaporized," said Whitseelan, smiling. "Why?" said the doctor. "Why did she try to use it against you?" Whitseelan tilted his head, not understanding. The Aztecs lived for war. They ate and drank war. Why try to kill the god of war? Whitseelan shrugged, a graceful shrug. "Perhaps that priestess did not want her sons to die. She carried my blood. She had the magic eye. She knew who I was." He laughed nostalgically. "Of all the peoples I've encountered over the last 5 centuries, my own people were the only ones who really understood war. We saw it in the street, in the marketplace. We saw the captured warriors and their fate. We saw our fathers and brothers and sons go into battle and not return. Did you know how he saw poison the Emperor before him? Poor old Tizok couldn't keep up the fighting, and the Empire was coming apart at the seams. It was Talasso's suggestion, of course. The old man lasted nearly as long as the Empire did, handing out advice to the Emperors, my advice." "It must have been a disappointment when the conquistadors came." "No," said Whitseelan. "Half the population were killed in the battles, and thousands of survivors died of smallpox. It was a banquet. I didn't have to lift a finger, as usual." "You pushed the Aztecs into conquest." "We both know I didn't. Tatsuka's suggestions were always politely expedient. The dedication of the great temple was attended by nearly every leader of the region. They were terrified, kept them cowed for years. The Aztecs were superb warriors. If I hadn't been there, they just wouldn't have been as efficient." "And you left with the Spaniards?" "I travelled the world, going wherever the action is hottest. I've never had to sing for my supper. Disappearances in Chile, famine in East Timor, China fighting Vietnam, Rhodesia fighting itself, terrorists in Brazil. A menu. A great menu spread out for me. I have caused nothing." "Nothing?" "The rioters and the terrorists and the murderers need no prompting from me." He laughed again, the flute becoming the beatings of flamingo wings. "Nothing." The doctor glanced down at Christian, who had slid to the floor, his eyes awash with Whitseelan's light. "Nothing." "Oh, sometimes I spice things up a little," said Whitseelan. "But what's an extra death? A few thousand extra deaths when millions are dying. No one knows, no one cares. No one." Whitseelan laughed again. "You think you'd stop the killing by casting your magic spell, but the wars will go on and on and on." "Actually," said the doctor, "that's not what I think at all." Whitseelan lifted a perfectly white eyebrow. "You're not supposed to be here," said the little man. "You died, Whitseelan. All those centuries ago, you faded away into nothing." The god was shaking his head, but the doctor went on. "Someone or something pulled a string of the cosmic web. You should have melted at the temple, but you didn't. Because I was there for you to cling to, and you went on existing like a parasite licking up spilt blood." "It was my will that I continued to exist," snarled Whitseelan. "My will and no one else's. I went beyond the boundary of death, and I am still here. Why else do you think they call me a god?" "Putting aside all the suffering you've caused to the thousands of corpses, to Christian Choquitel Alvarez." "Who's he? He's no one. No one is no one." roared the Doctor. "How can someone be no one except you vampire? You shouldn't be here at all, not as a man, not as a ghost, but if you become real, if I let you overtake me, you'll be the one to use that weapon, that thing, that box, that thing." "My Kotil," sighed Whitsealan. "My dear turquoise serpent, our war, you will be very different from now on." He grinned at the Doctor. "Are your words your food, world killer? All this talk and still the healer is becoming the warrior. How many people have you seen die, killer of worlds?"
So Dave, at this point we traditionally have a look at a contemporary review from the pages of Doctor Who magazine, and this one was written by Craig Hinton. Shall I tell you what
yes.
Mr. Hinton had to say?
Oh, please do. Oh, it was always a laugh hearing what Craig had to say.
Yep, when he'd read the books. Closing the vaults for this month, it's time to reach for the bookshelf. The Left-Handed Hummingbird, December's Doctor Who, The New Adventures, is by Antipodean Kate Orman, the first woman author in the range, an imbalance that I hope is swiftly righted. After an urgent summons by Christian Hotel Alvarez, well done me, I think I got that in
Not bad.
I got that in one take, listeners.
Not bad.
The Doctor, Ace and Bernice arrive in Mexico City in 1993. There, they discover the first puzzle. Alvarez has met them twice before, and has the photographs to prove it. Furthermore, both his previous meetings with the time travellers led to murder and madness.
Gosh.
Very soon, the Doctor and Ace are in 15th century Mexico to wander around the Aztec civilization. While trying to discover the identity of the Blue, a mind-controlling evil that appears to feast on bloodshed, the Doctor inadvertently falls into a complex trap. The Blue wants true existence, and the Doctor is its means of salvation. Managing a partial escape, the Doctor returns to find that Benny too has been at the receiving end of the Blue's torments. Facing a villain that can track them through time and seems to know their every move, the Doctor travels back along Alvarez's timeline, hoping to find the answer. Instead, he finds insanity, murder, and the truth about the Aztecs' bloodthirsty ways. A truth that Barbara Wright would never have suspected.
Interesting.
After 20 New Adventures novels covering most of the science fantasy genre, Orman has finally filled in a major gap, delivering the first psychological horror story, a tour de force of tension and fear that puts every one of the regulars in real danger. Poor old Ace and Benny have been put through the ringer on a number of occasions, but these were just minor irritations compared to their treatment here. And the Doctor, the high and mighty Doctor who takes enormous risks because of his confidence in his superiority, pride comes before a fall. Since we are following many of the supporting cast backwards through their lives, Orman has the difficult task of maintaining reverse continuity, and she manages this with aplomb. From the shattered Alvarez to the bitter Macbeth, erstwhile unit member, taking in the host of minor players in ancient Mexico, 60s London and a certain ocean liner, each one of them convinces, however brief their appearance.
Oh, Macbeth, yeah, I'd forgotten about him. He popped up again, didn't
Hamlet
he?
Macbeth, yeah.
Yeah.
Orman has definitely done her research, not only into the ways of the Aztecs, but also into popular drug culture. But nowhere does the book read like a history lesson. She has a fresh, buoyant style that whips the reader along from one fright to another. I know I'd never let Benny near one of my frying pans. Read the book. The only criticism that could be levelled at the book lies in the frequent drug taking, but that criticism won't be coming from me. So the Doctor takes a trip using magic mushrooms, groups of hippies smoke pot and take LSD. These things happen, and nowhere does Orman either praise or condemn such behaviour. The Left-Handed Hummingbird is the most adult New Adventures yet, and the most gripping. This is how they should be, taking risks while telling a damn good story. Here's to Kate's next one.
Absolutely. Which was set piece, which I'm pretty sure I got Sophie to sign at the Scarrison Convention in 1996.
Very nice. A nice little item there.
Yeah. Interesting. Scarrison 1996. Anyway.
We'll find out more about it, perhaps.
We'll come back to that, yes.
Indeed. Okay, we've heard from the DWM review at the time. Having a look in Goodreads in a contemporary state. Steve, do you want to tell us what it's got as a rating? And
right, the average rating appears to be 3.84, which which is fair, I think. 28% of reviews giving it 5 stars, 37% giving it 4, 26% giving it 3 stars, 6% giving it 2, and sourpuss grumpy face of one person giving it a 1-star review. Maybe that was Yoko Ono.
It could well have been. Well-known Doctor Who fan. Oh no, hang on, maybe not. So, here's our first review. It's a 5-star review from April McCaffrey. This book is so damn wild I don't even know where to begin. All I can say is that damn, Kate Orman knows her Aztec mythology and history, and she knows how to write continuity. But this book does contain a lot of drug abuse and PTSD, so just be mindful if you're planning on reading it.
Sensitivity warning, good grief. Right, the next one is from Drew Perron. This book was controversial at the time, largely because, in order to fight the psychic Aztec big bad, and none of those commas are necessary. This is me reviewing the punctuation on Goodreads reviews, listeners. Maybe I'll start on a separate podcast.
What percentage will you give this?
Exactly. I've given this the punctuation in this review 1 star. Anyway, the Doctor drops first shrooms, then LSD. But for Orman, this psychedelia isn't just for shock value. She uses it as a launch point for complex... There shouldn't be a comma after complex. For complex, abstract, poetic sequences, Technicolor fever dreams of sublime wonder, and horror. There's a lot of structural experimentation in here, with psychic visions, journal entries, and panic attacks. Gosh. Panic attacks sounds like the name of a modern Doctor Who fanzine.
It does.
Anyway, in the end... could that be a Beatles reference? The Left-Handed Hummingbird doesn't get as far as it wants to in terms of diversity, representation and pushing the boundaries, but it still accomplishes a lot. Oh, bore off. God.
Next is Numa Parrott, who, as we've discovered, is quite critical.
Okay.
Here's what Numa has to say. A startlingly good book, considering how horrible this series has been so far. Having the Doctor tripping on LSD is definitely new, so props for that, I guess. It was handled well as a plot device. The tidbits of Aztec history were nice too. I remember some of that stuff from a history project in high school, though obviously sans aliens. Team TARDIS is still an awkward mess. At least Orman gives us a look inside their heads and lets us know why. I'm really tired of Ace and Benny being inexplicably moody and murderous all the time. There are also a few great local characters, although it's a shame that most of them explode. The main
I
reason,
hate when that happens.
it's a pain when you're walking down the street.
It's a very
isn't it?
Monty Python thing, isn't it?
Yeah. The main reason I read these books is because they dare to go to places the TV show never dared, and every once in a very long while, writers like Kate Orman actually do a brilliant job of telling a great story. Thank you very much, Numa Parrott.
Gosh.
One final review here, Dave. Would you be care?
It's the 1 star from The Wonder That Is Adam James. Never trust someone with 2 first names.
Tobias Vaughan.
Exactly. Benji Clifford. The exception to the rule. You know, the real upside to Doctor Who getting cancelled in '89 was the chance for novelised stories to really enter into new territories. Crazy stuff like character development, and in the Left-Handed Hummingbird's case, something Doctor Who was always missing. Hardcore drug use. The Doctor takes LSD. Kate Orman thought this would be a super idea, probably because in order to write this ridiculous and unhinged book, Kate Orman had to have been on LSD. And in order for fans to understand it, they'd have to be on LSD too. LSD 2, as in Earth 2. Well, Adam, I think you're being a bit harsh.
I think that's very harsh. Why don't we get a...
Do you know what we should do? Inspired by Adam, let's take some LSD and read the book. Right, and we'll record the results. Okay,
Absolutely.
Listeners, there'll be a slight delay before the next episode as we recover. Let's just do the wind up.
Let's pop some now. Hang on.
Hang on. Whoa! Oh, gee whiz! My goodness, Left-Handed Hummingbird. This is definitely an interesting way to experience it. Kerry, you've got 2 heads.
Why have you turned into an elephant, Dave?
That's my big ears and my big nose, mate.
Oh, but
I'll just wave my trunk around.
Stop helicoptering it.
And stop doing it with your trunk as well.
Oh.
Jokes.
Why don't we have a quick look at I Who too?
Oh yes, that's it. Yes, let's behave ourselves.
Now that we're back to the real world.
Now that our trip has worn off, hang on. Oh, too early. Oh, there's Zeta Major by our friend Simon Messingham. Hi Simon, if you're listening. I have to read one of Simon's books, listeners, don't shout at me. So, the review in I Who, the unauthorised Guide to Doctor Who novels, featuring by Lars Pearson and featuring a drawing by Guy Davis of Sandman Mystery Theatre fame. At the end of the day, an almost ideal use of the Who premise of travelling anywhere in time and space. The Left-Handed Hummingbird has layer upon layer of historical events: the Aztec Empire, Lenin's death, and Titanic, mixed with envelope-breaking science fiction concepts. The story's so finely crafted that when the normally restrained Doctor trumps his companions and becomes a screamer, it's completely appropriate. He what?
Becomes a screamer.
Trumps his companions and becomes a screamer? What? Anyway,
Russell T Davies wouldn't go there.
it's also chilling in parts as the Doctor fights for his soul and his companion's love. And it proves to be a great opening volley from the elegant Orman. Interesting.
No, there we go. I think that's quite a fair review.
It's alright. I mean, it's the trouble is, it's so long since I read these, I just have the residual memory, and I remember this one, I liked this one, and I was not the sort of person to get annoyed about the Doctor taking drugs.
No.
You know, it didn't bother me. It didn't upset me in the slightest.
Or the continuity reference, which you hate now. But.
Well, yeah, I mean, depends. In those days, it was handled a little differently. That's why it was interesting listening to your chat with Gareth Powell about The Well a few weeks ago, because he was obviously talking about all the shed loads of continuity that he had to cut out, which he's put in. I'm glad he did cut it out. Anyway, no offence, Gareth, if you're listening. Continuity, yeah, I mean, do you know what? I can't even remember points of continuity dropped in at Left-Handed Hummingbird, so there we go. Doesn't really matter in that point, in that way.
So we think Adam James is wrong here.
Adam James is entitled to his opinion,
But
as we say, don't trust anyone with two first names.
So there we go, that's book number 3 in the cycle done. Tomorrow it's going to be Conundrum with Steve Lyons.
Excellent, good, because I'd forgotten what was next.
There we go. Well, you'll find out when you tune in tomorrow morning.
I will.
Podcast
I will.
Choice.
I will listen to it probably after I listen to tomorrow's episode of the Earth 2 podcast, whichever that is. We probably haven't even recorded it at this point.
But if you are enjoying what we're doing here on the Power of 3, and indeed what they do over on Earth 2, please leave a review on the relevant podcatcher and say nice things, because a lot of work goes into these things, a lot of research and time and editing, and indeed making dramatic readings come to life.
Yes, especially lots of editing when Kenny and I are recording together in the same room, because we do have a tendency to try and make each other laugh and to misbehave enormously. And of course, Kenny is such a professional that he's edited all of this out and you'll have no idea whatsoever.
Indeed it is. So, we like to finish with the tune, Dave. So, we were discussing something earlier and we think it might actually work because it's got a Doctor Who connection to it.
Yes, a very loose, tenuous Doctor Who connection. Obviously, much fuss was made about Kate Orman being the first female writer of a Doctor Who novel for the range, but she was also the first Australian, and what could be more Australian to someone like Kenny and I but the theme tune to long-running, popular, successful soap opera Neighbours.
Yes, it was sung by Barry Crocker, the ex-partner of Katie Manning.
Yes,
There's a link.
Yes. We'll see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye!
Neighbours, everybody needs good neighbours. Just a friendly wave each morning helps to make a better day. Neighbours need to get to know each other. Next door is only a footstep away. Everybody needs good neighbors with a little understanding. You can find the perfect blend. Neighbors should be there for one another. That's when good neighbors